Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pro Wrestling Inside and Out. We're going to talk about a plane crash that happened on October 4th, 1975. And to begin the story, here's Jack.
It was October 4th, 1975. Johnny Valentine, Ric Flair, Bob Bruggers, Tim Woods, and David Crockett were squeezed into a tiny twin-engine Cessna 310 airplane flying from Charlotte, bound for Wilmington, North Carolina, for an evening show at the sold-out Outdoor Legion Stadium. Wahoo McDaniel was also supposed to be on the plane, but he decided to drive instead. Valentine was sitting next to the pilot. He was the U.S. heavyweight champion and the Jim Crockett Promotions top star at the time. The following week, he was scheduled to face then NWA World Heavyweight Champion Dory Funk Jr. at the Greensboro Coliseum. He turned to the others in the rear of the aircraft and smiled. "Guess what?" he said. "We're out of fuel." And then he laughed. He laughed because he knew the aircraft could fly on the right engine, which was still running. At this point, the aircraft had descended to 1,000 feet above ground on approach to land and was cleared for a visual approach. The pilot reached for the fuel tank selection lever. He turned it to the reverse fuel tank, but it was empty too. The pilot was Joseph Michael Farkas, a 28-year-old Vietnam veteran. It had trouble getting the plane off the ground in Charlotte because of the combined bulk of the wrestlers. He didn't distribute the weight of the passengers in the plane properly and decided to dump fuel from the gas tank to lighten the load. His miscalculation would prove to be a fatal error. As Farkas turned the lever, the right engine sputtered, surged, and then nothing. Only the wind rushing by and the propellers turning in the cold wind. Farkas started screaming. Valentine reached over and slapped him to bring him to. The aircraft dipped nose first in rapid descent, only 3 miles short of the runway at New Hanover Airport.
I was scared to death, says David Crockett. I was supposed to fly that day. I wasn't supposed to fly that day, but my brother Jimmy was. He called up and said he was feeling bad with the flu. This was a Sunday event in Wilmington, so I said I'd go because it was only a 45-minute plane ride. I don't remember how it affected me, David said. I do remember that the engine on the left side they feathered they feathered it around Lumberton and Florence, South Carolina. To me, I still don't understand why we didn't land. Do I remember it, or was I told it? That was the question. I sort of remembered the other engine was starting to go. I remember leaning over, trying to control my breathing. My wife had our first child 2 weeks before, so I was trying to Lamaze, not Lamaze, Lamaze. So I would get to the wind knocked out. So I would get the wind knocked out of me and pass out because I knew if I passed out, I would be deader than a doornail. I remember thinking, I've got all these wrestlers in front of me. If we crash in the water, I'll never get past them to get out. There would be no way. I remember I saw a light go off and on, and that's it. Come to find out, my seat was the only seat in the plane that didn't break loose. That probably saved me. David mentioned that he asked Valentine what happened after the accident. Instead of giving him the answer, Valentine was glad he did not remember much about it. I asked John, because we were the last two that they took out, David began. He said, "Be glad that you don't remember." He said he thought his legs were caught. He said smelling the fuel and not knowing if it was going to go up in flames worried him. He just restated to me, "Be glad you don't remember."
We just dropped like a rock. Tim Woods remembers. For those of you, Tim Woods was Mr. Wrestling. Woods, who wrestled under a mask at the time, is the original Mr. Wrestling. Remember the conversation he had with Austin Idol, a plane crash survivor himself from a few years earlier. Austin Idol did not have his shoes on in the plane, recalled Woods from his Charlotte home, and it tore the bottom of his feet down to the bone, and he nearly never wrestled again. When Austin Idol told me about that, that was the first thing that went through my mind. I didn't have my shoes on either. The pilot had a big briefcase with some airplane manuals in it. I grabbed that and put it under my feet because I didn't have time to get my shoes on. I knew that I wasn't going to die, but I figured we'd all get hurt. It was just a matter of how badly. Johnny Valentine believed he would come out unscathed all the time when they were going down. He said he knew he wasn't going to be hurt. Valentine's wife is recalling this in a story. He said he felt like he was indestructible. He said they were in trouble, but that it was going to be all right. He kept telling them that everyone that.
Farkas used the controls to level the fast sinking plane at 4,000 feet. Then it clipped and tore through tree branches. Crockett said the pilot almost landed the plane safely. If we had gotten past the trees, we would have made the clearing right before the runway, he said. Woods recalled, when we finally hit the ground, the pilot stalled the plane. By doing that, he got our speed down as low as possible. We were still between 85 and 100 miles an hour when we hit the ground. On impact, all the seats broke loose, cascading one on top of the other. Johnny Valentine, his arms braced against the dash of the aircraft, took the full brunt of the seats, the wrestlers, and the baggage as they slammed towards him, breaking his back in 3 places. Crockett's head smashed through the seat in front of him, busting Woods' ribs. His mouth ripped open and his right shoulder dislocated. Ric Flair, who was just 26 years old at the time, suffered multiple lacerations and broke his back. Bruggers, a former linebacker for the Miami Dolphins and San Diego Chargers, also broke his back. The plane hit another tree, bounced off, and nosedived into a railroad embankment. We crashed about 100 yards short of the runway, said Crockett. We just missed a water tower from the prison camp, which is there. Valentine was conscious the whole time. As his back was crushed, a bone fracture wedged itself into his spinal column. His back would have to be reattached with a clamp. He was paralyzed from the waist down. His wrestling career shattered. After the plane crash, the 6 men were rushed to New Hanover County Hospital in Wilmington. The pilot died 2 months later in the hospital. Bob Bruggers had a steel rod inserted into his spinal column. After a month in the hospital, he went home. It was said he could have made a comeback to the sport, but he never wrestled again. Crockett, who felt the effects of the plane crash for 6 months after it happened, suffered trauma to his head and sustained other injuries.
Wow. Tim Woods stated, they stitched me up in my mouth, and I didn't realize that I had dislocated my shoulder. They tried to give me crutches to walk out of the hospital, but my right arm wasn't working. So they checked that and found out that it dislocated my shoulder. I was always complaining that whenever they put water or anything in my mouth, I would scream. When my wife got back to Charlotte, I was still complaining about it. I didn't want to eat or drink anything because it was hurting. She took me to the dentist, and when he looked inside his mouth, well, I can understand that. He shattered 2 teeth, and the nerves were just sitting there exposed. Since Valentine was the biggest draw in their promotion, Jim adds that his life seriously injured and hurt their business greatly because they were going to make him the biggest babyface in the promotion. Because they were going to make him the biggest babyface in the promotion. The plane actually took away Valentine, who, in my opinion, would have been the biggest babyface we ever had, Jim Crockett stated. Just because people respected him so much, and that if we had the right heel, it would have been just phenomenal. Because of the accident, Flair's body transformation changed drastically. after breaking his back, and Valentine, the biggest star, never returned to the ring after a bone fragment became embedded in his spinal column, which paralyzed him until he passed in 2001. When newspapers reported the plane crash, Tim Woods' real name, George Wooden, was used to hide the fact that Woods was sharing a plane flight with his bitter enemy, Johnny Valentine. In fact, when Wahoo McDaniel came to the hospital to visit, the staff there tried to restrain him and called the cops as they believed he was coming to attack Ric Flair, his rival at the time.
The original card in Wilmington, North Carolina was to have been a double main event. Tim Woods versus Johnny Valentine, with Woods avenging his broken leg at the hands of Valentine, and Ric Flair versus Wally McDaniel, which was a feud just getting started. This was maybe, now this is a story from a wrestling fan that was there. This was maybe my second or third live event. This one in Wilmington preceded this was Paul Jones versus Valentine, and on the undercard was Flair versus Ken Patera. That's how I remember both feuds were just getting started. The stadium was full, and the ring announcer came out just after I heard the rumor that there had been a crash. The show did not start late. The ring announcer was keeping kayfabe and said that there was a plane crash and Valentine and Flair were injured. He then went on to say that Tim Woods was lost and couldn't make it to the stadium on time. Then he mentioned that the spoiler number one was also lost. This has always puzzled me. Spoiler number two, spoiler number one were a team that had come in to avenge the unmasking of the Super Destroyer. I honestly don't remember hearing that Bob Bruggers was on the plane or even scheduled to wrestle. Needless to say, the crowd was in shock. Shortly after the initial announcement, Wahoo came out and said they were still going to wrestle and ran down the revised card. I remember Danny Miller in the opening bout. He later teamed with Wahoo. Spoiler 2 was the main hill on the card. I won't to say that Abe Jacobs and Two-Ton Harris were there, but I can't remember for sure. I know Miller, Wahoo, and Spoiler 2 pulled double duty and maybe a few more. The final would be a battle royal. After Wahoo ran down the card, he said that if you wanted to, you could get your money back. He said, I don't think anyone left. Bad time.
Yeah, it was awful.
That is an awful time. And, you know, it was just in February. That thing said a couple of years, but it was just February of that same year when another plane crash would happen that would actually kill Bobby Shane. You know, so some bad things was going on in 1975. Ric Flair does come back only about 3 months later, 3 or 4 months later. By the end of January of 1976, Ric Flair is back wrestling. It says a lot about Ric Flair and how tough he really was. Guys, anything we need to add to the story?
No, I think that's just it was a key turning point in wrestling history because so many guys went out, especially Johnny Valentine, who was viewed as one of the greatest of all time. And it's a shame that, we were deprived as fans of being able to see so much more out of him.
Yeah, that was a sad time. By the way, Tim Woods, I believe, wrestled the very next night.
He did.
Right after that. So for those of you who have not subscribed to the page, subscribe to it. And it'll let you know every time that we put upload a video right here on Pro Wrestling Inside Now. Give us the big thumbs up. And go one step further, hit that notification bell. There you go, just like that. And go one step further and share the video. Share it with your family and friends and let them know about Pro Wrestling Inside and Out. All right, we will return with more of Pro Wrestling Inside and Out and other videos in the future. Thank you so much.